highlights between frequent sightings of a certain type of UFO, glowing orange balls. They could be white or yellow as well. And some of these reportings of strange phenomenon and fault lines. And he's wondering if there's a connection. Also, there's a lot of reports of certain sounds and humming going on. You've heard of the hum in San Francisco and Taos, New Mexico. He's looking at that phenomenon as well and trying to draw some correlations. I'm intrigued from a personal level with Greg's research as well, because the UFO sighting that I had a year or so ago was of a white glowing ball that had a bit of an orange tinge to it. So I'm wondering if this phenomenon is also part of my sighting of a UFO. Welcome, Greg. Let me tell you that Greg is the author of Examining the Earthquake Theory, the Yakima UFO Microcosm. Greg, are you with us?
Yes, I am. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I understand that you've been looking into the UFO phenomenon for about 20 years.
That's right.
And I think you've focused on a very interesting focus here about the UFO phenomenon. Is it a natural phenomenon? What are these correlations? You have a whole gamut of possibilities here. And could you give us a little bit of background? How did you personally get interested in this particular aspect, the orange balls?
Well, I moved to the Tri-Cities, which is in eastern Washington, in 1978. I took a job there, actually, out at Hanford. And interestingly, the first day that I arrived there in the Tri-Cities in Richland, Washington, I picked up the local newspaper, the Tri-City Herald, and there was a story in there about Bill Vogel, who was the chief fire control officer on the reservation. And the story was a very serious, level-headed piece that dealt with his own investigations and research and slides that he had taken of some UFOs, some of what appeared to be lights in the sky there on the reservation. And I was quite intrigued by this, and I settled down into my new job and started a family. And several years later, I think it was 1981, I decided that I would contact Bill Vogel and take a look about what he was, probe into the story and see exactly what he was reporting on. Yeah, because it seemed like a very serious story, and I wanted to see if there was something to this. Well, I traveled up there upon his invitation there in Toppenish on the reservation and met him and spent several very intriguing hours looking at slides with him, talking to him about his own very massive file of reports that he had gathered over a 15-year period. And I left convinced that there was something here that needed to be looked into even further. And so that took me on to meeting him again, traveling up to the reservation, and I spent quite a number of years looking into what he had found out and interviewing witnesses there in the reservation, and finally concluded that indeed there was something physically real that he and others were observing, and that a book was required.
What were people observing? I would assume that my sighting could possibly be part of the phenomena that you're researching so extensively. What are people seeing? What's the range of things that people are seeing here that you're looking at?
Well, first of all, the number of sightings is rather amazing to me. There was about 200 documented cases that Bill Vogel and others had managed to accumulate actually over a 20-year period, and I think that only represents a very small percentage of what has been seen there. But among those 200 reports, predominantly 88% of them, in fact, represent lights in the sky, if you will, or light forms or luminosities or objects that appear to be predominantly emitting light. There's a smaller percentage of objects that appear to be structured or artificial or craft-like in their form and in their behavior and their appearance and so on. And even a smaller percentage of encounters with what could only be described as being humanoids or some kind of creature or life form, if you will. Those figures tend to match the statistics that we're looking at in terms of the whole body of UFO reports that have been gathered over the last 50 years. UFOs typically are described as being lighted objects of some type, with a smaller percentage being closer encounters and, of course, close encounters of the third kind observations of humanoids or beings or aliens or whatever you want to call them, and then even a smaller percentage of those being abduction reports. I came across all of it on the reservation, all varieties and all categories. But again, the predominant object that was being observed and photographed successfully were lights. Those lights tended to fall into two major categories in terms of color, white and orange. And I did a lot of analysis of the reports that Bill Vogel had collected, and many of these, by the way, came from the fire lookouts that manned the fire lookout stations on the peaks that overlook the Indian lands there. And in looking at their reports and Bill Vogel's reports, those two colors stood out predominantly, and also I began to see that they were being reported in terms of shape and in terms of other physical characteristics, such as motion and location. As a result of that, I began to try to find some physical explanation for what was being observed, because the consistency of the reports and the persistence of those features, the colors, their locations, things that they were doing when they were in the sky, began to convince me that there might very well be a natural explanation for this. And that took me into exploring the tectonic strain theory of UFOs, or the Earth-light theory.
Do you want to explain that briefly? It was quite a while ago that we talked with John Durr of the USGS, and he explained that in depth, but just as a reminder, it's quite a fascinating theory, and I think it's an important theory for ufologists and skeptics to know about, because for one thing, you need to have a pure database, and when you can attach a natural phenomenon explanation to some of these strange phenomena, then you cull them out and you are left with a database of things that truly cannot be explained by known phenomena.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the tectonic strain theory of UFOs basically operates upon a fairly simple concept. And if we start there, then we can work our way into some more of the complexities of it. And basically what the tectonic strain theory says is that there is a connection between seismicity, or earthquake activity, and light forms, objects that are emitting light. And the theory goes this way. In earthquake-prone areas where there has been a history of earthquakes and where there is a lot of faulting, strain can build up over time. And I'm sure that a lot of your listeners living here in the Pacific Northwest are probably fairly well educated about tectonic plates. But essentially what we as humans are living on is a very thin crustal skin on planet Earth. The Earth is almost 8,000 miles in diameter, and actually the Earth's surface only measures about 25 miles. And on top of that thin crust, or almost like an eggshell, is, of course, human habitation in cities and everything that we're doing here as a civilization. The plates that we live on are slowly moving, and they, of course, rub up against each other, and through friction and slippage emit energy, kinetic energy, which is essentially what an earthquake is. And the tectonic strain theory of UFOs says is that strain builds up in these areas and builds up over many years at a time. Sometimes we're talking about decades. At the time of an earthquake, usually about a 4 magnitude or higher, there are often observations of what are called earthquake lights. And John Durr with the U.S. Geological Survey is one geophysicist who has done an excellent job of collecting such reports of earthquake lights. Earthquake lights have been reported by the Chinese. They've been reported in Italy. They've been reported in the United States. They've been reported in Mexico. There's just about every country of the world that's had earthquakes, a history of them. For example, the Japanese. There have been good reports of observations of light phenomena during an earthquake. And as I said, it's usually 4 or higher. And these light phenomena take many different forms. Sometimes they're beams of light or look like searchlight beams. Sometimes there are aurora-like displays. Sometimes there are just general glows, which would appear to be on the horizon, such as a hemisphere of light emitted from the ground. And in some cases, there have been meteor-like objects or ball-like objects, luminous objects observed during these earthquakes. Now, the tectonic strain theory of UFOs is saying that during these periods of buildup of strain that are leading to one of these moderate to major earthquakes, something is going on in the crust. The mechanism is purely theoretical at this point, but something is going on to emit energy which is exciting the gases in the air above the surface of the Earth. Ionization is one theory that's been proposed here, which is essentially a process whereby molecules in gas in the air is being excited to the point where electrons are being disassociated or stripped off of the atoms that they're being carried on. And what happens as a result is we end up with positive and negative charges in a very excited plasma. As long as there's energy being pumped into the atmosphere, as it is being rapidly depleted and replaced, a plasma form can be sustained for a period of time.
It's also to be noted, Greg, that I understand that rocks under pressure, especially quartz rocks, which are very, very common, I think the Earth is a big percentage of quartz in that kind of rock, emit light in laboratory conditions when you apply the right pressure. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Tell us more about that. We need to have a quick timeout, and we'll come right back with Greg Long. I'm Laura Lee.
Laura Lee on Hot Talk 570 KVI.
Well, folks, the subject is the Kingdom, and I got some good news and some bad news. The good news is we only had to suffer through half a Mariners season this year. The bad news, the most exciting spectator sport in town was watching shirtless fat guys mow their lawns. Good news, the Dome has gotten a much-needed facelift. Bad news, Joan Rivers has gotten a lot of facelifts, and she doesn't look much better. More bad news, the auto show's been canceled this year. Yeah, I know. But there is good news, because there's still an auto show of sorts in the Seattle Times and Seattle Post-Intelligencer. You'll find an expanded auto section in Thursday's paper with the skinny on new models for $95. They're also giving away $3,000 down payments to 8 lucky car buyers. Look for details and participating dealers in the Times and PI this Thursday. Now, who knows? You just might find yourself driving to the Dome in a brand new car, which is pretty good news. Of course, there is bad news, but you don't really want to know what's in those King Dogs anyway, do you? The $24,000 sweepstakes on new car down payments this Thursday in the Seattle Times and PI.
John Carlson here, helping Valley of Auburn celebrate 30 years of service and quality. You want to visit Valley of Auburn?
And we're back. Hi, I'm Laura Lee. Thanks for tuning in to the Laura Lee Show. We're talking with Greg Long. He's right now joining us from Portland, Oregon, author of Examining the Earth-like Theory, the Yakima UFO Microcosm. I'm relating this to my own sighting about a year ago of a glowing white ball of light that floated from the woods across my street as I was driving home one night and over my house, lighting up the sky. I'm wondering if there's a connection. But what we're doing is having Greg tell us, rather in a chronological fashion, maybe that would be the easiest way to follow all the lines of research that you came across, Greg, his research over a decade of looking at these orange spheres or balls of light and their connection to UFOs, to earthquakes, and also to sounds, anomalous sounds, hums, and vibration. And he'll be asking if anyone in our audience has heard such a thing and has a report and have any of those phenomena and want to write into them as well as call into about this a little bit later on. But to go back to the theory that you were looking into as one possible line of explanation for all these sightings, and interesting that they're around Indian reservations as well. I've been hearing this for years, so it's fun to get the scoop from you, Greg. You were telling us about the theory that John Durr and Michael Persinger and others have come up with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, where we left it a moment ago was that essentially energy is building up in earthquake-prone areas and is released. As I said, during moderate to major earthquakes, we have a very natural phenomenon that's been photographed and reported very extensively called earthquake lights. However, the theory that John Durr and Michael Persinger have developed is stating that before earthquakes, and that may be as long as 6 months to a year or even longer, in some cases even after earthquakes of the size I've mentioned, light phenomena are being caused by some mechanism. Now, they don't have a handle on what that is yet, but at the U.S. Bureau of Mines in Denver in, I think it was the early 1980s, John Durr worked with a fellow named Brian Brady and some other investigators, and what they did is they took various types of rock, for example, basalt rock, marble rock, and some others, and they put these in a laboratory and applied extreme pressure, something like, I think, 32,000 pounds per square inch. And using a high-speed camera, they managed to record at the moment that these rocks broke under pressure the emission of light forms. And in these cases, they were managing to record on film small balls of light and even little beams of light, and these balls were seen to be rotating and were either bluish-white or orange in color, which interestingly matches the colors that were observed on the Yakima Indian Reservation. Again, they were orange and white, sometimes bluish-white.
Now, this is a very small emission of light, but then they're just using a few rocks in a laboratory. Could you imagine larger emissions of light on, a scale of a huge scale, such as you would have in the field?
Well, during earthquakes, you do have, large emissions of light. There are some reports of lights that have been seen during these major earthquakes. Now, for example, I came across a report of a major earthquake in China, in Tangshan, China, in 1976, where residents of Tangshan were awakened early in the morning as they thought that the lights were on in their houses, that someone had thrown the lights on in their houses, and it woke them up. Well, they looked outside the window, and what they saw was a very big glow many, many miles away that was reddish in color, which illuminated the night sky. And then moments later, the earthquake struck. So it's possible to see flashes of light or glows covering large geographic areas. Now, the problem, though, with the tectonic strain theory, and again, it's a theory, and it hasn't been proven, and that's what I'm attempting to do, is test it more extensively, is that before the earthquake itself, there is something going on in the rock. Whether it is there's various theories, for example, sonoluminescence suggests that shock waves can essentially vibrate bubbles of air in underwater streams and groundwater, and as a result, photons are emitted. Again, what would be required here would be kinetic energy. Microquakes are very, very low-level quakes, and John Durr believes that even microquakes can be somehow emitting electrons. Exoelectron emission is a term that he has coined with Michael Persinger to explain how gases above the Earth's surface are being excited and ionized. They don't know what the mechanism is. There are some intriguing things that they've done in the laboratory. There are some theoretical things that they're exploring. They don't have a handle on that right now. But what you need is some source of energy, and you need enough of it, and you need to be able to sustain it long enough to be able to ionize the gases in the atmosphere in order to generate some of these objects that are observed in some cases up to many minutes at a time. It has weaknesses, but it's very, very intriguing. And it intrigued me because the Yakima Indian Reservation is heavily faulted. And there's a ridge there called Toppenish Ridge, which has 150 faults. And during these sightings that people were having on the reservation, there was a moderate earthquake on this ridge. And Michael Persinger and John Durr took a look at the seismic records from the Yakima Indian Reservation for the period of time that we're talking about, which would be the late 1960s up through 1980. And indeed, there's clear records that small earthquakes were occurring on the reservation. So there's a lot of interesting indicators that point to something going on in the Earth itself that's causing these lights to be seen. The problem is, how do you explain these stranger reports? I mentioned such as close encounters and abduction cases, and objects that do not have these more simplistic shapes, which would be spheres. Many of these things seen in the reservation were described as spheres of light or balls of light, and the photographs that we're taking clearly show that.
So let me ask you a question. When it's a natural phenomenon, often they are not a ball of light. That is more associated with truly an unidentified flying object. But when it's associated with earthquake lights, are they balls of light, or are they beams of light, or are they just sparks of light? And you mentioned they only last for a few minutes at most.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the earthquake lights do take many different forms, and they typically last only a matter of a few seconds. I, out of interest, decided to test this theory a little bit further, and I contacted the media in Klamath Falls in southern Oregon, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but last fall in September, there was a major earthquake in Klamath Falls.
Oh, sure, we heard about it.
You heard about that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. That was the first one that occurred there in 50 years. It's a very quiet area. The history of earthquakes is essentially non-existent in Klamath Falls. So out of curiosity, I contacted the media down there, And I did get a response from one of the radio stations who broadcast a small story on my research. I did get an answer from an engineer, a general contractor, who during the moment that the earthquake occurred, actually there was a precursor that struck about 10 minutes before the major shock was felt. And he was prepared after feeling the first one because he had never felt an earthquake before. And so when the second one occurred, he was standing there under the door of his house and then ran outside. Well, the instant that he ran outside and the shake was still occurring, the shock was still being felt, he observed in about 3 different locations what he described as being like an overturned bowl of a soft white glowing light that extended, in some cases, 300 meters in length. He saw these to the east and to the southeast and up to distances of several miles. And then as the shaking subsided, the lights died away. And I passed that on to John Durn. I think that's a very good example of an earthquake light being seen at the time of an earthquake. Now, I guess your question is, when UFO witnesses report lights in the sky, do they take various forms which might indicate something natural? And I think the indications are that that may very well be so. Ball lightning, of course, is round, and ball lightning comes in essentially white or bluish white or red or yellow or orange. That typically seems to be the spectrum. Ball lightning is round. It appears to do things intelligently at times. It can enter through windows or down chimneys or through flues or through keyholes in doors or under doors. Some of the witnesses report ball lightning as appearing to behave intelligently, but this may be because the witnesses are projecting onto a natural phenomenon anthropomorphic characteristics and are interpreting their actions as being intelligent. Now, the same thing may be going on the Yakima Indian Reservation, that balls of light that are hovering or moving very slowly, or in some cases are moving quickly along the ridge, are surveying the landscape, or they're following observers, or they're looking for something. But those interpretations can be purely human-based, where we're wishing upon something, intelligence where it's not there. So I'm always very careful when witnesses come forward and report lights in the sky or light forms. It's when you begin getting reports of objects that seem to be artificial. They have windows, or they have extensions on them.
Or they look metallic, or they're doing some sort of aerial acrobatics that are phenomenal.
Exactly.
So I guess the question here is, what percentage, certainly not all of UFO sightings can be explained this way, but what percentage, if any? We'll come right back to Greg Long and hear more of this theory and hear from you as well. I'm sure that our audience members have some reports of their own and many questions. I'm Laura Lee.
This is 570 KVI Seattle. Hot talk for the Northwest.
There's an American tire company that's been making high-quality tires since 1914. Cooper Tires. There's a local tire dealer that's been doing high-quality sales and service for a long time, too. Puget Sound Tire. Puget Sound Tire has 4 great locations to serve you with the Cooper Weathermaster ST Radial Traction Tire. And it's available at a great price right now in South Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, and Auburn. Puget Sound Tire's 4 locations. This is the tire you want this winter. This is Cooper's best traction radial tire. It features thousands of biting edges that push and pull you through snow, mud, and slush. Puget Sound Tire also knows that traction driving is demanding on your vehicle. So they also offer everyday specials on alignments for most cars at only $24.95. A lube oil and filter change at only $14.50. And ask about our special pricing on cable chains. Puget Sound Tire, 4 locations. The Tire Authorities.
With all the haggling over car prices these days, buying a new car can feel like being at an auction.
What do you give me for the...
Tuning in to the Laura Lee Show, Greg Long joins us, author of Examining the Earthquake Theory, the Yakima UFO Microcosm. And we have some calls for you, and let's start out with Doug. Welcome, Doug.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
How does one follow an auto commercial?
Just dive in.
It's okay. It pays the bills. I think I have a solution for you. What causes the voltage? A friend of mine, Gary, and myself had done some experiments back in '75. He was into shortwave radio, and on the 10 and 20 meter bands, we were living in L.A. He lived in Beverly Hills. I lived in Santa Monica, and about 4 to 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd hear real big static crashes, and that would die down shortly after sunrise. We correlated it when the static crashes were greater when the moon was also down on the western horizon. The sun was coming up on the eastern horizon. If there was a big rainfall, also it appeared that the static crashes were greater. What we ascertained was it must be the piezoelectric effect, where the rock is pressed very hard and it gives off voltage. And I told this to somebody I know, a friend of mine at Caltech, and they looked into it, and I believe they wrote a paper on it about 5 or 7 years ago, and they also concurred it's probably piezoelectric effect.
Greg, makes sense?
Yeah, well, that very well may be true. I'm not an expert on the piezoelectric effect. I do know you need to have enough pressure to do that.
Well, the Earth certainly has it. Yeah, the Earth has it. It's not a problem.
And you need to have generally quartz.
No, you can have almost anything. As long as the rock or the crystal lattice work is in more or less the same direction, or enough of it, you can have it.
But not all rock, though, has a lattice structure.
Crystalline rocks do.
Yeah,
and a lot of it down there is. So you might want to look into that, or call up Caltech and ask them, start looking at some of the literature, but a piezoelectric effect is what we had figured out that it was. By the way, also we had plenty of earthquakes down there, especially around Palm Springs area and where the San Andreas Fault was. Not big ones, but small ones, but we did correlate. Sometimes we'd have some very big crashes, and within a week, there would be a minor quake in the area, and then it would die down to almost nothing.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So we did correlate earthquake activity and the signal on the 10 and 20 meter band, and then dies down after the pressure was relieved, and it would build up over time.
You know, one thing I was also wondering about, Greg and Doug, is if there is an energy emanation, does it have an electromagnetic component, a luminous component, a vibratory component? I also know some folks who were experimenting with looking at earth sounds and had put various metals, copper and silver and iron and such, in the ground with a tape recorder, and they were noticing they were in Northern California and just noticed that during one of the earthquakes, they got some very interesting pings and pongs and different noises than they were doing before. So if there's some sort of energy surge, be it kinetic energy, I mean, are there other forms of it? So could you have possibly some of the humming or some of the other phenomena that you've been looking at, sounds reported with, but they happen without there being earthquakes, both in the area and in the timeline. So there might be a correlation, but not always. What do you do with data like that, Greg?
Well, what you try to do is you try to find patterns, and you try to find out where they're being reported, and then you have to start really doing an inductive job at piecing together all kinds of fragments of evidence in terms of the geology of the area, the landscape, the history of the area, and try to make some sense out of it. Now, the sounds, interestingly, on the Yakima Indian Reservation, these fire lookouts and others were reporting what they described as being underground sounds. They compared them to dynamos or turbines or motor-like noises. Nothing was recorded, unfortunately, but I've managed to come across similar sounds reported in other locations where there have been, again, light phenomena.
And actually, Lindy Tucker will join us. She was supposed to be scheduled for tonight, but she had to postpone until December 10th. And she's going to play a very interesting recording of some of those sounds associated with UFO sightings that were recorded at the Tulalip Reservation.
Yeah, that's right.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
If they were in the Yakima Indian area, they were hearing a vibration in the ground. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it was reported in two different ways. One way it was reported was that they were hearing motor-like sounds. And in some cases, they were compared to a truck laboring up a steep highway or incline and never reaching the top. In a few other instances, fire lookouts reported that there seemed to be a very slight vibration in the ground itself. And in fact, one of the lookout towers which was sitting on a concrete slab. The lookout went outside upon hearing the sound and could feel very, very light vibrations going on in the concrete slab.
Was this during a storm?
I don't have clear records on all the weather conditions during all of those sightings.
The reason I ask is this. I'm somewhat familiar with the Yakima area, not that much of the geology, but I have driven through it a number of times. Is it possible, this is a question, if there was a cavern underneath the ground or someplace in the hills where these people were, and the cavern was filled with a liquid, water, and there's a lot of water down there, couldn't it act like a electrolytic capacitor, store up energy from a storm or a voltage passing through the ground in certain areas, and as it discharges, vibrate?
Yeah, I'm sure that's a possibility. There seems to be all kinds of possibilities. I mentioned sonoluminescence before, in which, in the laboratory they're sending shock waves through pure water. And what they're finding is that there's bubbles of gases in the water. Essentially what they're doing is they're expanding and collapsing very rapidly. And what that's doing is essentially, as I'm understanding it, it's disassociating molecules of gas in the water and emitting photons. And so I suppose there's all kinds of geological and geophysical mechanisms that one could explore and theorize on. And all I can do at this point is try to put together pieces and work with others who are experts in all kinds of technical areas and see if there's an answer there.
Possibilities, verification of them is another thing. Doug, thank you. We'll be right back with Greg Long. I'm Laura Lee.
Laura Lee on Hot Talk 570 KVI.
Hi, this is John Carlson inviting you to join me Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. for an open house, tasting, and holiday wine sale at Silver Lake Winery in Bothell. Silver Lake Winery makes some of the best wines made anywhere. In fact, their 1991 Cabernet Sauvignon was the only Cabernet awarded a gold medal in one of the Northwest's most prestigious competitions. Plus, Silver Lake Winery is Washington's only consumer-owned winery. They're bringing together thousands of wine enthusiasts to build the Northwest premier winery. Their holiday wine sale is this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from noon to 5, with some wines up to 50% off. Plus, you can learn more about their plans for a consumer-owned winery and become a shareholder in it yourself. I'll be there Saturday from 1 to 4, so come on by and try these terrific wines with me. That's Silver Lake Winery. It's easy to find, just 1 mile south of Mill Creek, right off Bothell Everett Highway in the Pear Business Park. For more detailed directions, call Silver Lake Winery at 485-2437 and join me for a tantalizing tasting at Silver Lake Winery. See you there.
What are you doing?
Blindfolding my boombox.
Why?
I don't want my boombox to know I'm feeding it Panasonic alkaline batteries instead of the others I usually feed it.
You feeling well, dear?
If my boombox can't tell the difference, I'm going to feed it Panasonic alkaline batteries all the time.
Why don't you sit down, dear?
You see, Panasonic alkaline batteries last a long time.
You've been working too hard.
And they're really powerful.
Maybe I should call a doctor.
But Panasonic alkaline batteries are a phenomenal value.
Oh, I see, dear. That's why you're blindfolding your stereo. I think you're missing a few batteries upstairs.
No. It's crazy to pay more for batteries than you have to when Panasonic alkaline batteries are so economical.
Give your equipment the Panasonic alkaline battery taste test.
Blindfold not included.
Panasonic alkaline battery is available at Eagle Hardware and Garden, Kits Cameras, 1 Hour Photo, and KB Toy Stores.
This holiday season, it's all about giving at South Center Mall. With over 150 stores to choose from, you'll find the perfect gift for everyone on your list. Let South Center help you make your holiday shopping easier this year.
It's the time of year we call the holidays, when your to-do list is longer than the line to your local latte stand. Chances are it says something about picking up more gift wrap, more tinsel, and ribbons and bows. Maybe you're short on ornaments? Who knows? Well, put this at the top of your list in bright red. Go to Everything's a Dollar at South Center now. At Everything's a Dollar, you'll find so much for not that much. And that includes just about everything on your to-do list. Whether it's finally time to trim the tree, get a last-minute gift, or just wrap one, Everything's a Dollar has you covered. Everything's a dollar, where everything's a dollar. Located in South Center Mall.
Wrap up your holiday shopping at South Center this season. Just bring your purchase receipts to one of the 2 gift wrap locations and your gifts will be wrapped for free. It's all about giving at South Center Mall.
Got something to say on this topic? Give us a call at the KVI studios in King County at 421-5757. In Pierce County, that number 751-5757. In Snohomish County, 348-5757. In Kitsap County, 698-4700. U.S. West cell phones can also call us at the KVI studios toll-free, pound 570. Let's hear from you right here on the Laura Lee Show on 570 KVI.
Keep listening. Sunday mornings at 9, tune in for some fiscal talk. It's the KVI Financial Show with Albert Israel. Count on Hot Talk 570 KVI.
And we're back. Hi, Laura Lee here, talking with Greg Long, looking at lights, luminosities, sounds, hums, reports of various creatures, I guess, Greg, that are anomalous, unexplained, unusual, and offering up explanations, be they of a geological nature. I guess you're saying that you put all this stuff together and see if you have any commonalities or statistically significant correlations. An intriguing theory. And we'll see how much further you get along with that theory and what you found. But first, we have a call from Chuck, who wants to know about radar, if this stuff shows up on radar. Hi, Chuck. Thanks for joining us.
Hello there.
Go ahead.
I read your book, and I was very impressed, especially the part about the tectonic strain theory. It explained the 2 occasions that I'd seen almost identical to what you explained lights over here above Mercer Island and on the 520 bridge, except they were white, like Laura Lee's, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, is that right? That's interesting.
Yeah, they moved the same way, the right angles, very high speed. And I could see them from where I was on Finn Hill. I could see them above the water in front of the island. So I had an idea how big they were and how fast they were moving. It was very impressive. It was so impressive, I even told more than a couple of friends that I was planning on getting a travel trailer and moving to Eastern Washington to see what I could see out there myself.
Did these have a distinct shape to them? Were they round or were they just lights?
The best description I could give you is they were similar to a star, but of course much closer, so they were smaller, of course. And they were very, very bright, though. The best way I can describe it is very pure light. There was no, every other light you look at will have kind of an off-white or tinge to it. This was like crystal clear.
I had to, let me just interject my description of the light that I saw that was round and glowing. I had just recently looked at the planet Saturn through one of those big, huge telescopes where you have to climb up the ladder and peer through the eyepiece, and got this dazzling view of the planet Saturn. And it was this incandescent, beautiful, bright light that had some special quality to it. And the light that I saw on the UFO was similar. That's what was going through my mind when I was thinking about that, or seeing the light. I was going, gosh, it's got the same gorgeous quality as the planet Saturn when I saw it. It was a particularly gorgeous, pure light.
And this was round, Laura, is that what you're saying?
Yes, it was round, very much a sphere. Mm-hmm.
And you got to see it close. That must have been nice. I saw it from about 10 miles away.
And it was just traveling, taking its time, going over the street and behind my house, and lit up a huge fir tree as it went behind it. It kind of backlit it.
You're lucky. Well, the main reason I called is I was wondering if these things would show up on radar.
Well, of course, there are a lot of radar cases, in the UFO literature. I'm trying to think of any classic radar visual or radar case where a ball of light showed up on radar, and actually I can't think of one. I did talk to a scientist in Berkeley who, and in fact there's an article that I've recently written that will be published in the International UFO Reporter. Back in 1947, he was working at an experimental radar station near Arcata, California, and he had observed on radar objects that came in from the Pacific Ocean over this experimental radar station, and he attempted to try to find some explanation, first looking at equipment malfunctions and discounted that. He never was able to see anything visually. He went outside and looked and never saw anything, and he has developed a theory which is similar to the kind of thing that Michael Persinger is developing, and that is essentially photons may be creating a plasma which would not be visible to the naked eye, but it would be compact enough and excited enough that it could reflect radar beams. And that's about as far as I can answer the question whether these balls of light could be observed on radar.
Well, I got
if indeed they're plasmas. I'm not certain.
Earth has her mysteries.
Sure. I've got something for you may be interested in.
What's that?
I've got a short 30-second recording that just happens to be queued up here of a 911 operator who got a report of 60 UFOs, or excuse me, 60 individual UFO reports. So he called a local airport to get a confirmation on the radar, and the conversation is the two men talking, and it's interesting because the similarity between this and what in your case is the object separating and coming back together.
Oh, interesting. Can you play that for us just after this short timeout?
Absolutely. Yep.
Stay tuned, and we'll get Chuck's 911 recording of that call. We'll be right back. I'm Laura Lee. Recording of a 911 conversation. You're saying of someone verifying 60 individual UFO reports, and it showed up on radar. Go ahead.
Okay. Here it goes.
Muskegon. Hi, Muskegon. This is Ottawa County 911 calling. You have a radar there, don't you? Yes, we do. You do. You getting anything weird down in the southern Ottawa County area? Anything weird? Hold on for a second. Okay. Okay, the reason I ask is we're getting a whole bunch of calls of some strange lights. Yeah, we've had about 60 UFO calls. Yeah, let's see. Wait a minute. There's something right there. Down there. Wait a minute. That's really strange. There it goes. Okay, it's moving. It looks like a big blob. Yeah, that's the way it was explained to us. I mean, now I'm getting multiple returns. One of the people that called that I had happened to talk to said it looked like a bunch of cylindrical objects. Well, oh my God, what is this? They were going together and coming apart. Yeah, there's three, and they're lengthwise. Now I'm getting three of them. They look like a triangle on my scope. I'm looking one or three of those. They're very strong. These are huge returns. I've never seen anything like they're just popping up all over the place. This is strange, yeah, because the officer says it's green and red lights. It does not look like an airplane. Okay. They come together and then they separate, and they just keep doing this all the time. And you're seeing that? Yeah, I'm seeing three returns. They've moved. This is strange.
There you go.
Very interesting. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, you have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
And I wanted to know where your book was available. Chuck was saying he enjoyed it very, very much. Is it in the bookstores? Great.
Well, actually, it's available from QFOS, or the Center for UFO Studies.
Okay.
I can go ahead and give the address if you'd like.
All right.
It's QFOS, just CUFOS, or you can write out Center for UFO Studies if you'd like. The address is 2457 West Peterson, Peterson, Chicago, Illinois, and the zip is 60659.
And our next call comes from Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hello. Mike.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, let's see, this morning about 6:30, I had I recall like an encounter. About 6:30, I was up in the Bonnie Lake area in the backwoods of the Highway 410, and I happened to see what appeared, what I thought first was a star. It was real bright, but then, I was driving towards the main highway towards 410, and I looked at it, and the thing was real low. It was like maybe 1 to 2,000 up in the air. And I said, well, wait a minute, it had an appearance of a star, but it was bright as bright could be. And it just stood there, and then it kind of floated a little bit, and then I was just, driving down towards 410, and then it kind of, faded back. And I couldn't make out what it might have been. I know it didn't appear to be a star. To me, it appeared to be some type of an unusual UFO.
And what time was this exactly?
This was roughly about 6:30, 20 minutes to 7. That was this morning.
I'm not aware of what astronomical bodies are out at this hour. I don't have a star chart in front of me. If I did, I could tell you whether that might be a star or a planet. I guess my answer would be is that if there is an object in the sky that looks like a star, and if you're traveling in an automobile, you need to stop and get out of your car and look and see if there's any motion. And if you don't see any motion, any obvious motion over a period of several minutes, you need to assume that you may be looking at a star or a planet.
Well, this is...
Okay. Well, thank you for the call, Mike.
Okay,
And-
Laura Lee, I need to ask about your address again because I wanted to find out about getting a hold of the gentleman that was on your program, 2 weeks ago?
My address is P.O. Box 3010,
3010.
Bellevue, Washington, 98009. And our hotline is 781-4473, area code 206. And our order line for tapes and selected books from our guests is 206-455-1053.
Yeah, what was the name of the gentleman again that you had on there about 2 weeks ago?
I'll tell you on the break. Hold on.
Okay, thank you.
And when we come back with Greg Long, we'll spend a little more time with him. We're going to talk about some of the other research that he has been doing, and that includes, Greg, it includes some of the sounds of heavy machinery that has been going on in certain locales among a lot of witnesses. It includes other research that you've done. Can human beings hear microwaves, for example? You found something that says it does. What about antimatter? And there's some research among the military that you cite. Could this be at all associated with this? You've got some other angles on this topic that we want to hear about. We'll return with Greg Long in just a few minutes. Also later on tonight, we'll be talking with Bill Harris about a new facet of brain-mind research. He's applied some chaos theory to it and got some interesting results. Also, we'll be talking about some popular movies with a film connoisseur. I'm Laura Lee.
This is Western Washington's #1 news talk station, 570 KVI. KVI Seattle. Hot talk for the Northwest.
Here's the latest from ABC News. I'm Dorothy McIntyre.
It's not because she's tough, but it's because God is good.
That's Dwayne Whitten in Atlanta, talking about the fact that his 2-year-old daughter Naomi has been found alive after being lost in the forest for nearly 24 hours. He says she wandered ones at the...
He visits us from Portland, Oregon, where he has been researching a UFO phenomenon of a certain aspect for over a decade, and that is the many, many reports. This is probably one of the most common kinds of reports, isn't it, Greg, of orange lights, spherical glowing lights in the sky, and he's wondering, is there possibly, for some of them, a natural phenomenon that's at the source of them, an explanation for them? He's got a partial theory. What else were you looking at in your search for what these might be, Greg? Because that is your main focus here. What are these? And you're discounting nothing and looking at everything. Because you never know where that answer may lie,
That's right. These orange spheres have been associated in a number of cases, I'm finding, with some consistency, with sounds. And beeping sounds specifically. I know in the future you're going to have Lindy Tucker on your show, who will be able to actually play a number of these recordings of beeping sounds. I'm looking at one here, for example, which is a good example of the kind of thing I'm finding. This report is from the Milwaukee Journal of August 21st, 1972, and a young man named Greg Faltersack was driving home early in the morning, about 2:30 a.m. after visiting his girlfriend, driving his automobile, 1963.
2:30 a.m. I asked you.
Well, they were reading books or something. Anyway, he was in a 1963 Plymouth when suddenly it suffered a complete electrical failure, and the engine died, and the radiator heated up. And he slammed on the brakes and brought the car to a stop and saw a large orange circular object that appeared to be hovering just over the treetops. And he estimated the size of it as 20 to 30 feet in diameter. He watched it for 7 seconds, and then the object went beep, beep, and rose out of sight. Police took his report seriously. They went out, they measured tire tracks where he had braked 23 feet. He had traveled as he braked, and also his car was checked out. Fuses had blown out in the car. It had definitely overheated. He had not been drinking. And they believed him. And I think, indeed, that's exactly what happened to him. Here's another case where...
he must have had an honest face.
Excuse me?
He must have had an honest face.
Yeah, that's right. Here's another case, July 17th, 1972. And by the way, a lot of these beeping cases associated with balls of light occurred in the early to mid-1970s. This occurred in Elliott Lake, Ontario, Canada. 3 girls reported a UFO. One of the girls described the object as, quote, a giant red ball about the size of a full moon. The sound that she heard was similar to a helicopter blade, a humming noise, and then there was, quote, an intermittent beeping sound coming from the area where the object was observed. And so there's case after case that I, in my own research, have uncovered, predominantly newspaper clippings, again, beeping noises associated with these orange spheres. So one has to look at all angles, as you said, and try to put together the pieces. There's auditory clues, there's location clues in terms of where they're being seen, there are clues in terms of the time of day, there are broader geographic patterns. What I'm doing now is I've collected several thousands of these reports from primarily newspaper clippings, but also from investigator files, from articles, from books, from all kinds of sources. And I'm beginning to find that there are some clusters where they're appearing in different states and different regions and at different times. And we may be able to see movement across large geographic areas of these objects. And if it's related to earthquake strain that's being released, that's building up and being released in broader regions, we may be able to go in and actually see a history of the passage of these objects as strain moves across a region.
Speaking of history, Greg, with your connections to the Indian communities, do you find that they have legends or records going way, way back of such phenomenon? You also say there's a lot of reportings of Bigfoot, hairy creatures, which there are a lot of tales among the Indian folklore for these things. Were you able to look historically from that angle?
Well, the Indians on the Yakima Indian Reservation are fairly reticent, and the few that opened up to me more than others talked very naturally about these phenomena. It seemed to me that what I kept hearing was that UFOs and Bigfoot and what are also called the stick Indians, which are an invisible life form, if you will, perhaps a spirit of some type, all seem to kind of blur together. They use the word Stiaha, which means both the Sasquatch, or big hairy man, as well as stick Indian, and UFOs all wrapped up into one. And I heard some legends from some of these Indians. Typically, the stories went they might be lost in the woods as young children. And they'd lost their way, and a light would appear, or a small Indian figure would appear out of nowhere and escort them to the right path or trail, take them to safety. There were some stories I heard of observations of luminous beings that were walking on ponds or on lakes late at night. There were stories about invisible things approaching their campsites and stealing things, stealing food or fish that was laying out to dry.
Kind of a poltergeist effect.
Sort of a poltergeist, sometimes playful. I couldn't get from any Indian there any direct connection between, I guess, legends of ancestors or particular heroic figures or personalities and these objects. What I seem to be getting all the time was it's all pretty much the same thing, and we take it naturally, and there's nothing to be afraid of. It just comes and goes. That's what I was hearing.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly their cosmology is more adopting and accommodating to this sort of phenomenon, perhaps, than ours, isn't it? One other question I have for you is, When you're looking at side-by-side phenomenon, is it coincidental or is it causal? How do you make that determination? I guess you're still in the process of seeing if there is a connection or not between some of them. Do they just happen to, I mean, do you find some UFOs coming down and observing things, so then they would be sighted, but not necessarily a causal effect with some of the other phenomenon, for example? You offer that as one possible explanation for their frequent sightings coincidentally.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very good way to look at it. Again, if we look at the Yakima Indian Reservation purely from a geophysical and geological point of view, again, as I said, it's heavily faulted. It lies at the foot of the Cascade Mountains, which still remain volcanic and active to one extent. The reservation is not that far away from Mount St. Helens. The theory that's been proposed by Michael Persinger was interpreted or applied in the case of these sightings on the reservation, that tectonic strain in the whole region of south central and southwestern Washington was building, and as this strain built, lights were being observed which really functioned as precursors to a main event, and that main event was the volcanic eruption. Now, interestingly, after 1980, sightings diminished considerably. The peak of the sightings was in the early to mid-1970s. So if we look at the reservation purely from a geographical point of view and apply a theory of this type, we can say that Indian legends of invisible beings and hairy creatures and all of that is really kind of overlaid on top of a purely natural situation that's going on. Add to that the common point of view that I think most of us share, that UFOs have to be alien spacecraft manned by advanced intelligences from other worlds visiting us here, and you lay that on top of natural and legendary information, if we want to go that route. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. The problem, though, still arises with the reservation that you have some very strange things that are reported, and there were some, as I mentioned, some creature sightings. There was a case where a young boy in Hera on the reservation who awoke one morning and heard a noise out on his porch and looked through the screen door and saw a small creature standing there holding what looked like a gun, pointing it at him. And this creature then rotated on what's described as a sort of like a pedestal or a base, and moved off the porch and went around the side of the house. And the boy ran around to the back of the house and saw this creature and several others, which were on the roof of his house, looking down at him. And then they moved into a small craft-like object, a flying saucer, if you will, and a door was open in it. And they walked inside, and in fact it had a console and looked like it had instruments on it, and the door closed and the thing rose up into the air and vanished in a cloud.
No natural phenomenon that we know of.
It's kind of hard to explain in terms of the tectonic strain. So,
yeah.
So you have to look at all of this information and follow it in whatever direction it takes you. But I think you can't discount a natural explanation first. Incredible stories do demand incredible proof. I think that's probably a common saying that all of us have heard. And so I can't simply accept all of this as being alien first. I've got to look at an actual explanation before I accept it.
Well, it also could be many phenomenon together, intertwined, as you were mentioning. It all just kind of blends together, and how do you separate all this stuff out if it has some common characteristics? Also, it seems to me that Persinger has also posited that when we have certain electromagnetic emanations associated with earthquakes, that it also can affect people's minds such that they're more prone to hallucinations. Isn't that part of his theory? And certainly there are some people who say that they are biosensitive or they are earthquake sensitive such that they are picking up the vibes, and animals act erratically. The Chinese have found associated with earthquakes. So I think that is also part of Persinger's theory. And do you buy that part of it? Personally, I don't.
Well, I know in the laboratory he's taken basically a helmet with electrodes, and he's attached this to the heads of experimental volunteers, and he has stimulated their cortex, and he's asked them questions during this experiment in terms of what they're observing and feeling. And they do talk about shadowy forms that are around them, noises and sounds and this kind of thing. But from what I can pick up, the information that they're giving seems to be fairly generalized and somewhat vague. And in fact, if they are seeing beings or figures around them, I wonder if those aren't the experimenters themselves in the room or nearby with them.
One wonders. Also, you mentioned, and I wanted you to cite the references. This is fascinating, that we have the ability, human beings, perhaps to hear microwaves. And when we're talking about people hearing heavy machinery underground and these kinds of things, certainly there's phenomenon that we're putting forward in an age of technology such as ours that, may be part of the background landscape of phenomenon, but certainly aren't natural, unless you want to consider our technology as a natural output of humanity, but certainly not a geophysical. So maybe there's other kinds of things going on, and you also look into antimatter as a possible. We'll be right back.
Only on Hot Talk 570 KVI.
Be prepared for power outages. Honda Power Equipment, Snohomish County PUD, and Hot Talk 570 KVI invite you to a free generator safety seminar in the North End. Just call 258-8443 to register for the seminar in Linwood, Marysville, Everett, Edmonds, Monroe, or Arlington. That's 258-8443. Brought to you by Snohomish County PUD, Honda Power Equipment, and Hot Talk 570 KVI.
Laura Lee here. Let me tell you about one of my favorite herbs. It's one that I take every day, and I take a lot, and it's cayenne pepper. One of the things that I just understood from an herbologist just the other day, he told me that when you take cayenne pepper with some of the other herbs or nutritional supplements or vitamins that you're taking, that the cayenne acts as a catalyst, and it gives more oomph to the rest of the herbs and helps them work better. And I also know that Heart's Food brand, which is the brand of cayenne pepper I take, because it doesn't burn and it's got these other synergistic herbs right in there in these convenient capsules such as lecithin and garlic and some other herbs, that it's a convenient form of it to take. And I know that it gives me more oomph, more energy, helps keep me warm too. It's something I really enjoy about taking cayenne pepper daily, helps keep me warm. There's a lot of reasons to take cayenne pepper as a medicinal herb. Has a lot of vitamin C and a lot of other nutrients in it for one, and I think it's best to get some of those in a very natural way. Herb is nature's medicines. If you'd like a free sample of Heart's Food cayenne pepper, you can give them a call and they'll mail it out to you. You can give it a try. Call them at 1-800-CAYENNE. That's 1-800-CAYENNE. For your own sample of Heart's Food cayenne pepper, read about the many benefits of this medicinal herb. 1-800-CAYENNE, 1-800-CAYENNE, and tell them that you heard about it on the Laura Lee Show.
Kids today do not play kick the can like you did. They don't dress the same way you did either.
Wicked cool lid, man.
They've never even owned a record. And their lunchboxes, like their superheroes, are fluorescent green, neon pink, and electric blue.
I'll trade you a protein for a carbohydrate.
All in all, they're quite different from the way you were as a child. In fact, today's kids are sharper, brighter, and more colorful than ever. Fortunately, so is Fujicolor Super G film. So why are you taking pictures of them with the same old film? Try Fujicolor Super G film. Because your picture should be nostalgic. Your film shouldn't. Fuji. A new way of seeing things.
Look for Fujifilm at your local retailer.
Start the holidays in fairy tale fashion. Take the family to the Mary Bridge Children's Hospital.
Theory, the Yakima UFO microcosm. And Greg, one thing that you mentioned is that you're also looking at these same kinds of corollaries in other parts of the world, not just the Pacific Northwest, but in several other places. Do you find a lot of correlations? Or some? It's interesting. What are those places? I guess England, Colorado, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania.
Yeah, there's sounds, or we mentioned these machine-like sounds, or they're described as turbines or motors.
Heavy machinery seems to be
heavy machinery.
Yeah.
England, Italy, which of course Italy is earthquake-prone. Colorado, Texas, Puerto Rico, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I think there's 7 or 8 different areas where I've come across very consistent descriptions of those sounds in particular. In fact, they're uncannily similar down to the phrasing, the actual descriptions that these witnesses are using to describe these. So we can take a look at those areas in much more detail geophysically. Now, I haven't done that yet, and that's the next thing that I have to do. But I culled through the literature and found those references, and it's really quite amazing, the consistency there.
And how is it that humans can hear microwaves? You say that some of the sounds, buzzing, ticking, hissing, knocking, those are quite frequently experienced sounds. Not all such sounds are going to be caused by microwaves, but we can perceive a bandwidth of the microwave frequency. Could you explain that?
Well, I think I can't give you probably a pure technical description, but the acoustic nerve and the acoustic bones in the inner ear are sensitive to microwave frequencies in which the pulse has a certain width and a certain repetition rate. And once those things are in proper order, physiologically, those nerves and that auditory mechanism is being stimulated, and so what you would be hearing are, buzzing and ticking and hissing and knocking and so on. Unfortunately, those aren't descriptions of motors, but that's a good example of where electromagnetic radiation can cause people to, quote, hear something when there's nothing really there in terms of sound being caused by kinetic energy.
It would also explain perhaps why some people hear it and some people don't. Some people's ears are just pitched that way and other people's are not, perhaps?
Yeah, that's very possible.
So it's kind of an individual ability to hear these things. Also, you talk about the Air Force expecting to be producing anti-proton fuel by the turn of the century, according to Aviation Week and Space Technology. Article from 86.
I didn't know that I said that. Where did I say that?
It's in one of your articles. And also, you're wondering if these are perhaps emanations, I'm wondering, from some sort of secret technology, perhaps? Or what is this? Why do you mention this in one of your articles?
I'm still not certain that I mentioned that ever in any article. Are you confusing that with another article? I've written a lot of articles, and
Orange Balls of Light by Greg Long, and in here you just cite a report by the Air Force, according to this magazine. And you're wondering, why would the Air Force decide to finance research in such a far-out propulsion system? Because they already knew it would work.
Okay, well, I suppose what I was thinking about was plasmas or fusion energy as being an energy source for aircraft.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe some of the things that people are seeing just happens to be a byproduct of this process, perhaps in a test fashion.
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. And antimatter, have you looked much into that? I hear cryptic reports of even major universities in the Pacific Northwest having secret labs where they're playing around with antimatter, and that they're using it or holding it with magnetic containment bottles. Have you looked into this at all? Because you also mentioned that in your article.
I haven't looked into that. No, not specifically. That's interesting that there's people thinking that's going on in the Pacific Northwest. I never heard of that before.
I've never heard something I could verify. I've just heard rumors.
Oh, I see. Well, to me, it would be only a rumor. There.
I want to make it very clear it's just a rumor.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to tell us about this phenomenon that you're looking at?
Well, I guess the thing I'd like to leave everyone with is the fact that there is a massive body of reports that have been collected over 50 years by private UFO groups in this country, individuals, UFOs, for example. There's enough data now that we can go into it and we can analyze it with confidence. We have enough data that I think we're not dealing with randomness or arbitrary anomalous events. There is consistency. There is persistence in terms of the kinds of objects that are being observed. We can go in a very fine detail, begin to separate groups of objects from others and look at them in terms of their selves and in terms of where they're being observed and how they're behaving. And I think that's probably going to bear the most fruit in UFO research over the next 10 years. The data is there. It's a matter of taking theories that have some substance to them and some possibility of answering either the whole mystery or part of it, in testing them with the data. And I'd love to hear from anyone in your listening audience who has observed, recorded, photographed these kinds of objects. Again, they're typically balls of light, and they're typically orange or white, and it would be a tremendously valuable contribution to the research that I'm doing.
Oh, your address, please. Where do we send this? If people
send whatever you can, if you have it, to P.O. Box 819, Philomath, Oregon, which is actually south of Portland. That's spelled Philomath, Oregon, and that's 97370. And I'd be glad to talk to anyone personally on the phone if they'd like to call, and my number is area 503-929-3557.
I'll certainly write up my report. Do you think my sighting, from what you've heard, my description of it tonight, is something that would be useful to your database?
It would be very useful. I'd like to talk to you at some time and go over that in detail.
Well, as I write up a report for you, which I'm happy to do, what kind of details, and this will be helpful to any audience members who are also wondering when they have pen in hand and they go, okay, Greg, you want to hear about my sighting? What do you need to know?
I need to know what time it was when you saw it.
Okay.
Where it was located, that is, what direction you saw it in. I need to know in detail what it is that you saw from your memory, in terms of all the physical features and characteristics of what motion, what direction it traveled in, if it did, an estimate of the duration of the sighting, and an idea of what you were doing before the sighting and what you were doing after the sighting. That's probably a good starting point.
Wonderful. Okay, and you can, if you have such reports, I will certainly send mine in. You can make it out to, send it to Greg Long, and he's at P.O. Box 819, Philomath, Oregon, 97370. I'll give him a call at 503-929-3557. You might also pick up his book, Examining the Earth Light Theory, the Yakima UFO Microcosm. Fascinating piece of research, Greg, and I appreciate your sharing it with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me on.
And we'll be right back on The Laura Lee Show. I'm Laura Lee.
This is 570 KVI Seattle. Hot talk for the Northwest.